Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be your moderator for today's webinar organized by Funds for NGOs. Today's topic is funding for enterprising NGOs. First of all, I want to thank each one of you for taking out time from your busy schedules. This webinar will run for 60 minutes, which includes a 45 minutes of presentation followed by a 15 minutes of Q&A session. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A option on your webinar screen to post your question and we will respond to them during the Q&A session. Let's begin with webinar's objective. The first objective is to understand innovative funding models suitable for enterprising NGOs, to identify strategic approaches for securing sustainable financial support, to explore practical tools for diversifying NGO income streams, to apply funding insights to enhance NGO growth and impact. Please note that the webinar is being recorded and recording will be made available in the video section of the Funds for NGOs premium website. And now allow me to introduce today's trainer, Dr. Christopher A. Johnson. Dr. Christopher is an award-winning journalist, editor, publisher, and business management consultant since the 1980s. He is also a former Commonwealth Nuffield Cambridge Press Fellow, Management Science Fellow, a certified Commonwealth Youth Worker, holder of an MBA in Marketing Management and a doctorate in Business Management. He is renowned for his tutorials in bid writing, business planning, leadership, marketing, and organizational development cum capacity building. He is both founding director of Global Entrepreneurial Development Services Limited and chair of Community Education Academy of Leadership. He supports economic and social policy initiatives in Africa, the Caribbean, the Middle East, and South Asia. Now, I kindly request Dr. Christopher to lead the session and share screen.
Thank you very much, madam. Good
you.
day to everyone. And I hope that you guys are enjoying yourselves. Let me just get the screen sharing here. Okay. Could you see the screen, please?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, good morning again to everyone and welcome to another week on funding for NGOs, funding for enterprise NGOs. Today we are looking at a very important topic, funding for enterprising NGOs. And I think it is important that we establish, first of all, what makes an NGO enterprising. There are so many different components for which an NGO can be seen as an enterprising organization. And on your screen, you would notice that there are several entities that reflect the enterprising nature of an NGO. So, for example, we are looking at the public enterprise sector, which includes governmental institutions, departments, local government. All of these form part and parcel of public institutions. They are responsible for providing services. So we were saying that what makes an NGO enterprising is that it needs to understand the different sector ecosystems that exist. One is the importance of public sector institutions and organizations, what they do, how they function in terms of being service providers, grant providers, and then, of course, private enterprise, which is responsible for commercial and financial activities, whether they're involved in purchasing capital or other. And then, of course, you have the social enterprise sector, which includes religious and faith organizations, charities, and other NGOs or non-governmental organizations. All of these are integrated within an enterprising format. And so NGOs, in order for them to be enterprising, need to understand how these systems work. In mapping the funding landscape, it is important to understand as an NGO or NGOs how funding works and the kind of systems that exist within the society, the kind of resources that you find from time to time that exist. So we have, as we said, we have public sector grants or government grants. These are grants that are decided on the basis of projects. The conditions of funding are usually publicized on websites or reports. And these grants are based on a project by project basis. And they are, of course, based on government policies, procedures, systems, etc. And so, on an annual basis, most governments will provide grants to non governmental organizations. They will also provide subventions to different local authorities and other institutions within the communities so that they can access resources to, to be sustainable. And then, of course, you have foundation grants. So, for example, you have the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation, you have Oxfam, you have Children in Need, and you have other foundations that are providing support to various organizations. There are also families that actually will grants to different organizations, for example, for cancer research, for biomedical research purposes, for education training, capacity building, volunteering, or even for political campaigns. Grants are available for that purpose. And then, of course, you have corporate sponsorship and individual donations. Corporate sponsorship, for example, is like providing bursaries or grants for trainees, for apprentices, internships, or interns rather, who are involved in employment activities and so on. So it is very important for NGOs to understand the impact of these donations or grants on their organization. First of all, it would provide them an opportunity to access information and data on how funding is allocated, but also we have to look at the challenges, one of which is the unpredictability of funds, the risk of these funds not being aligned with the organization of the NGOs. So, for example, if you are looking for sponsorship or donorship from a tobacco company and you're involved in a health project, that would be misaligned with your objectives. In other words, it would not necessarily be appropriate to access funding from a tobacco company or even from a company that is involved in providing, let's say, illegal alcoholic substances or something of that nature. So it is important to understand not just the funding landscape and its impact, but also the challenges that would you have to take into consideration. Social enterprise income is important because this is a revenue approach or revenue base within which or upon which social enterprises actually survive. They generate funding from membership fees, donations from trustees. They receive subventions or grants from governments, local authorities, and they also receive funds by their own fundraising activities, either family runs, sports, games, activities, and so on. So there are a variety of ways in which NGOs can be enterprising without depending too much on public funding, so to speak. Again, the impact of social enterprise income, it promotes self-reliance or financial sustainability in some way. And it also creates another issue, that is the risk of seeking funding from markets that are not necessarily aligned with what you do as an organization. And that is why it's important to understand the mission and objectives that you have. In terms of international agencies and organizations, most of you are familiar with United Nations funding bodies like the UNIDA, United Nations International Development Organization, UNESCO. uh, UNCTAD, the World Bank, and other uh, multilateral agencies that provide funding. You have the Asian Development Bank as well. You have the African Development Bank, the Caribbean Development Bank, and the Arab League Bank as well, various banking institutions. These are regional institutions that provide funding for medium to large scale enterprises. And this is where NGOs need to actually become investment ready in order to access such funding. Of course, the challenge for NGOs in terms of international funding is the layer of complexity. Layers of complexity, meaning the bureaucracy, the time it takes for you to access funding, and the highly complicated structures that exist within these organizations. So, again, it is important to have some understanding and appreciation as to how to access funding from international bodies. There are a number of large corporates now that are being pushed or being encouraged by governments to invest in what is called social investment. It is part of their corporate social responsibility or CSR. And so, what these organizations do, they look at how NGOs are working for the common good. The common good meaning in the best interests of different communities. For example, looking at issues around exclusion, digital exclusion, social exclusion, economic uh, impoverishment, material deprivation, all of these social issues that impact on different communities around the world. A number of commercial institutions are now moving towards social investment policies that will encourage innovation and improve the dynamics of organizations when it comes to funding. However, the challenge for NGOs in terms of social investment capital would be the high expectations that have to be met. High expectations meaning that you have to ensure that your organization is retrofit to suit that kind of funding. You need to have systems in place. And as we would see in the next slide, how important that is. And then, of course, you have your traditional academic research grants. I say traditional because these are parts and parcel of funding resources that are limited to educational institutions, be it further education institutions or higher education institutions like universities, academic centers of excellence, and so forth. A lot of these grants, however, are based on evidence that are both qualitative and quantitative. In other words, what is it you're trying to accomplish? Are you trying to solve a problem? Are you contributing to policy mechanisms or policy measures in government? And so the research grant from academia will certainly be related to that kind of evidence based. However, you may not have a particular niche. So, for example, you might be researching issues to do with children who have certain disabilities, such as dyslexia, dyspraxia, or cerebral palsy, or any one of those conditions. But then you may not necessarily have the capacity and capability as an organization to deal with that. So even though the research grant can be made possible through the university or other institutions of learning, you may not be able to access that grant. So your organization needs to refocus and to develop a system upon which it can survive in order to access such funding. And this brings us to the point I was making in the earlier slide that you need to align your vision with funders' priorities. What do we mean by aligning your vision? First of all, you need to understand what is it you're trying to achieve. Is it a training objective or goal? Is it a well-being goal? Is it leisure and sports? Is it around agriculture? Is it around employability? Is it around capacity building, volunteering? Is it about advocacy, counseling, guidance, etc.? So you need to have a clear set of goals and objectives by which you actually operate from. You have to make sure that whatever you do is measurable. You need to make sure that you have quality control procedures in place, whether those procedures are based on assessments, continuous assessments, evaluation, post ante evaluation, meaning you're tracking progress of activities and events that have taken place. You need to make sure that those objectives are measurable by monthly, quarterly, semi annually, yearly, or biannually every 2 years. And how do you translate that vision into objectives? Well, you need to understand how funders operate because they're always looking for continuity or sustainability. And I've said to you on this platform repeatedly that you need to research funders, find out what are their priorities, what is it they're looking for, what is their overall strategy for the next 5 or 10 years. Are they funding children's programs, young people's programs, women's programs, employability programs, apprenticeship programs? What type of programs are they interested in? And are these programs or funding tranches relative to the government or the municipality or the MLAs, for example, that you have in your particular community? How do you find common ground? How do you translate your mission and objectives to suit the funder's conditions or criteria? How do you develop proposals that are tailored or customized to benefit funders? It is important to always remember to develop proposals that are compelling. In other words, proposals that are winnable, achievable, realistic, proposals that can stand up to scrutiny, proposals that would be easily read and understood with evidence, concrete evidence, both anecdotal and as well as formal evidence. Relationship building is sine qua non, it's essential, it is a key to communicating to funders what is it you're trying to achieve. And why do you have to build relationships? Well, building relationships is a strategic key for organizations if they are to sustain themselves for a long time. We spoke about communication. Again, communication is not even a key or an essential, it is integral, it is part and parcel of your organization. So seek feedback, find out what the funder requires, what the funder would like from you. How could you improve the quality of your proposal? What are the indicators for evaluating that proposal? And how could those indicators impact, or how should they impact on your organization? And more importantly, stay focused on your mission. If your mission is to develop employment opportunities for young people between the ages of 16 to 19 and 19 to 25, stick to that. If your mission is to achieve well-being objectives within a community of people between the ages of 55 plus, stick to that. If your goal is to achieve sports and leisure facilities for young people who are unemployed, who are disabled, stick to that. With whatever mission you have as an NGO, make sure that you focus on that mission. However, in order for you to be successful in identifying the different funding arrangements, the different funding institutions and agencies, you need to understand what is called the macro and micro factors that underpin funding. Everything that we do in life is impacted by others, individuals, systems, mechanisms, structures, procedures. They're all important to us. They form part of the ecosystem of funding and resourcing. And so, in front of you, Your slide suggests that if you are to attract funding, you need to build capacity. But how could you build capacity if you don't understand what is happening within your organization? For example, what mission do you have in place to deal with funding? What is your leadership structure like onto? Do you have people with expertise, with the experience, the knowledge, the know-how, the commitment, the dedication, the zeal and enthusiasm? Are they really interested in sustaining the organization or building a social status background for themselves? What kind of resources do you have? Do you have capital resources? Do you have digital resources? Do you have a physical premise or premises that you operate from? Who are your stakeholders? Are they governments, government departments, local government institutions, or are they civic organizations like yourselves, religious, faith organizations, campaigning bodies, professional associations, enterprise networks? What products do you provide? What services do you provide? Do you provide information, advice, and guidance? Do you provide training? And how do you measure performance as an organization? Who measures performance? Who's responsible for that? Is it the chair of the organization? Is it a director responsible for administration and leadership? Or is it a volunteer who deals with supervisory or supervision matters? All of these issues need to be considered. And then you have your socioeconomic factors that are sometimes seen as macro factors. What is happening in the society, the language barriers, the issue of understanding other communities based on ethnicity, based on tribe, based on history, their culture, their heritage, the health factors that relate to people. What are the issues regarding the politicians and the ideologies that they are put forwarding? Who is posturing? Who is campaigning? Who is lobbying? Who are the influential people in your society? Who are the persuaders? Who are the people who can impact on your NGO in terms of campaigning? And then, of course, the more complex areas of legal and administration, in terms of how laws are made, statutes, acts, for example, the Data Protection Act, Equalities Act, the act governing the use of land and property, etc. All of these are very, very important factors to bear in mind when you're trying to build capacity as an NGO. Today, most of us are being asked or being encouraged to use artificial intelligence. On this platform, I mentioned a few months ago that artificial intelligence is nothing new. In fact, it's a combination of science and technology that started in the 1950s. What is new, however, is the way how artificial intelligence has been able to fuse or combine a number on numerous information and data collection sources on one or two different websites or platforms to create, if you like, interest, encouragement, and support for various entities, including NGOs. And so, for NGOs who are interested, and I'm sure that all of you should be interested or must be interested in research to improve your research capability, you need to understand how to use AI for research purposes. And so, this slide suggests a mechanism, though brief, as to how you approach developing ethical proposals using AI tools or analytics, as they sometimes describe or prescribed. So, as I was saying, that in order for us to craft proposals using AI tools for research purposes, we need to look at introducing the subject matter. What is it we are trying to research? What kind of AI tools are we suggesting? How would those tools be, how could those tools be maximized for research purposes? And what type of language models would we use in terms of AI tools to ensure that we can improve and enhance our writing and other reportorial purposes. So once we understand what is it we are trying to accomplish, one is the kind of AI tool that we are looking at or looking for, and the kind of research, then we begin to look at ethical matters. Having done that, we then have to look at the background to the research. Are we looking at current practices? Are we looking at future developments or trends within a particular area? And what ethical guidance do we have? So, for example, let's say we are looking at a condition that affects elders, like Alzheimer's disease or schizophrenia or any other mental health conditions. How would we go about researching? Would we start from a rural area, a suburb, an urban area, or a village area? What are some of the practices that exist within those areas? What cultural practices exist for dealing with mental health conditions? And what ethical practices or guidance we can seek before we actually begin to use AI. And on the right hand side of the screen there's a Springer 2024 study focusing on AI, stating that 67% of researchers used AI tools did not disclose their use in published papers. So again, what they're saying is that AI tools are not always the right tools to use when it comes to research. Because what those tools do, they provide you with some idea or ideas as well as a structure, but they do not necessarily provide you with the evidence that you need until you probably do the research and ask for some sort of recommendation for improvements, etc. And then, of course, you have to set objectives. Are those objectives clearly defined? Are they based on any bias? Are they based on poor accountability practices? And having set those objectives, what is the methodology? How would you go about describing current practices? Who are the partners you'll be dealing with? Are these partners in the public, private, and civic sectors? What kind of outcomes are you expecting? How do you develop a toolkit that has ethical use or usage? How do you go about doing that? Again, you have to come up with outcomes that are reflective and realistic in order to understand how to use AI tools and ethical considerations too. Anonymized data collection. This is data collection collecting from anonymous sources, for example, sources that don't want to be quoted or cited. Anecdotal evidence, for example, observation studies. All of these approaches you can use to actually access information and use AI actually to help with that matter. And then, of course, we come to references. People who use AI sometimes forget that references are important. And what you need to do is if you're using ChatGPT or an alternative Copilot or Gemini, you need to sometimes trigger questions by asking the AI tool or the AI facility to help you with references. But again, you can only do that if you understand the subject matter that you're researching. So I would say to wrap up this particular slide, if you're crafting a proposal for AI research, always make sure that you understand the idea behind the research, understand also the ethical dimension of that research. In other words, who will it benefit? What are the challenges behind that research? What are the issues involved? And more importantly, what are the outcomes that you intend to derive from that particular research? This is supposedly the penultimate slide where we're looking at key performance indicators. As I said again, this is about enterprising NGOs, and for them to be successful, they need to have some sort of validational tools that will enable them to assess and measure performance impacts. And this is a typical example of a program for young people You notice on the left-hand side, there's the objective of establishing a regional resource centers for young people, for communities. And then the objective in the middle is to expand it. And then the third objective on the right of your screen is to increase the capacity for priority school programs. And if you look at this slide carefully, you will see how KPIs or key performance indicators have been set over a year, 2 year, and 3 year period. This is the kind of indicators that NGOs need to set from time to time. And this is where your management and trustee boards play a very significant part by including the membership, your external partners, your funding bodies, government
Excuse me, doctor.
institutions. Yes.
Sorry for interrupting you, but can you please manually select the slides as the viewers are not able to see the slides, please?
Okay. Could you see 7?
Not right now. I think you're using dual monitors if I'm not wrong.
Okay. Okay.
If you could not use the full screen and just select the slides manually would be a lot of help. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So
Yes.
could you see that now?
Yes, they're visible now. Could you
Okay. They're
please
visible
select the
now.
slides manually?
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Okay. Could you see that now?
Yes, it's visible, doctor.
Okay. So could I put it from current slide?
No, no, you can continue with your presentation just the
Oh,
way
oh,
it
you
was.
can see. Oh, you can see. Okay. Okay.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes. So we're coming towards the end. And as I said, my humble apologies for this technical system. I'm using a different system at the moment. So it is creating some issues. What it shows is that technology is not always foolproof. But again, my humble apologies, and I hope you can still access the information that is available. So the final slide is sustaining your organization beyond grant funding. And this is where the organizations have to look at private donor engagement policies. You need to develop models for improving your organization. Again, looking at corporate sponsorships and partnerships where they are, looking at the kind of fee paying services that you can introduce from time to time, developing a crowdfunding platform or mechanism upon which or through which you can access resources. And then, of course, looking at different forms of collaboration between NGOs and other organizations. And finally, developing a strategic plan of action based on budgetary requirements, forecasting, etc. What I would say in terms of sustaining your organization beyond grants funding is to continue to do your research on how funding is acquired. Try to seek information from your MLAs or your political representatives in your area. Attend grant meetings, whether they're online or in person, and try to find out what are some of the priorities that are designed for different types of funding tranches. I think if you do that, you'll be able to develop a very enterprising approach to NGO development. I wish to thank you very much for this presentation. I wish to thank you very much for your patience and your attention. And as I said before, I am using a different system at the moment, and I think that is why it is creating a bit of problem. But I hope that you've enjoyed the presentation. And at this time, I'd like to avail myself for any questions that you may wish to ask. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Doctor. Dear participants, now we have started our Q&A session. You can send us your questions so that we can take in the session. The first question is, what common mistakes do NGOs make when trying to diversify their income streams?
Yes, the first, I wouldn't say mistake. I would say it's a challenge that they have if you have to, as an NGO, to diversify income streams, you first of all have to ask your question, why is it that you're diversifying? So, for example, if you're receiving funding from the government or the public sector and you decide to access what is called private donations or corporate sponsorships, you have to decide what is it you're trying to accomplish. Why is it you're trying to diversify income? Is it because that the income that you have traditionally is insufficient or inadequate, or it's not fit for purpose, or the paperwork is too extensive, or the bureaucracy is too complex? Those are questions you have to ask yourself. And then also, what are you diversifying for or to? Is it funding for children? Is it funding for women, young people, funding for elders, funding for agricultural producers in the case of environmental resilience funding? So there are lots of questions to be asked before you can make a decision, or as to why you are diversifying in the first place, because diversity has a lot of elements integrated in it in the first place. I hope I've answered the question to the best of my ability here.
Yes, doctor. The next question is, how can smaller NGOs build credibility to compete with the larger organizations for funding?
Yes, we've had this question a few times on this platform, but I'll answer it again nevertheless. Smaller NGOs need to be very focused on their mission and objectives. I know that's a standard answer or a stock answer, but it's true. If you have a mission that is clearly designed to help and support people within your communities, stick to that. If your goals are to ensure that you improve your volunteering recruitment system, stick to that. If your goal is to ensure that you would increase maximally your financial resources by 20%, stick to that. In other words, whatever goals you've set out, make sure that you concentrate on those goals. Don't get caught up with other NGOs and what they're doing. Don't get caught up with what politics is doing in your country. Yes, you have to pay attention to it, but focus on your mission and your objectives. Develop clear guidelines as to how you will go forward. Make sure that you have people in place who are competent, dedicated, and committed. And more importantly, be passionate about what you do, because people actually see through you when you're passionate. All of those are very important aspects that you should include in your sustainability plan. Uh, if you are to improve competitive advantage, compete on the basis of quality service, quality organization, trust, and respectability. That is how you will be able to compete with the larger organizations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, doctor. The next question is, how can a small NGO get funding for people living with CKD?
CKD. Could someone explain what that means?
Sorry, I don't know, and user had
Okay,
talked
so
about.
it might be physical, psychological, or mental, but I think, again, the organization in question, the NGO, needs to find out where funding can be had for that particular condition or that particular illness or situation or circumstance. The NGO needs to also find out, the minimum amount of funding or the maximum amount of funding is available, how that funding is allocated. Is it over a number of years? What kind of conditions have to be met for that sort of funding before you actually think about getting that funding? And does your organization have in place systems to monitor that funding that is allocated? And if so, how would it go about measuring that funding, etc.? And how many people are we looking at? How many beneficiaries or participants are we looking at? Those are some of the questions I would suggest that the NGO looks at before it entertains funding for that particular condition or situation. Thank you.
Thank you, doctor. The next question is, many funders ask for audited accounts for, say, 3 years or so How do you help new NGOs on this?
Yes, audited accounts are very important, not only from a financial probity or rectitude point of view, or financial regulatory point of view, but also from the point of view of making sure that funding is being given to organizations that are desirable, that have a reputation, and that are, as we say, well established. Most NGOs that are less than a year will not be expected to provide audited accounts. What they can provide is an income and expenditure forecast. In other words, based on their level of activity and events, they may say, okay, in the next year or so, we intend to raise 20,000 rupees, 20,000 pounds, 20,000 shekels or euros or dollars for a particular set of activities. So you can produce, I would say, an income and expenditure forecast, and that will be satisfactory to funders. And of course, within that income and expenditure forecast, you need to have explanatory notes which provide evidence of how you're going to accrue that funding, over what period, what you're going to use the funding for, and then how you're going to evaluate that funding as well. So I would say for NGOs that are less than a year, use your income and expenditure forecasting approach. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor. The next question is, what should I do to connect with sponsors and partners? Then I can give credibility to the NGOs.
Yes, the first thing to do is to find out where sponsors are. You can use the internet to access that kind of information. Find out what is it they are sponsoring at the moment, what they have sponsored before, what they plan to sponsor, and generally look at their plan of action for the next 5 or 10 years. Once you establish that, you can then begin to speak to the funders, you can speak to the public relations officer, you can speak directly to the chief exec of that organization or the director, and create a relationship. Make sure that you create a relationship whereby you can have a discussion with the person. You could even invite that person to lunch or dinner, so to speak. But relationship building, relationship forming, I think they're all important to uh, fundraising and sustainability. I hope I've been able to answer that question. Thank you.
Yes, Doctor. Thank you.
You're
Um,
welcome.
the next question is providing consultancy services a suitable funding stream for NGOs?
Yes, it is. Remember that consultancy is a high order skilled area. It's about knowledge. It's about knowledge attainment. It's about what I would call strategic thinking. As a consultant, I deal with all kinds of different individuals, agencies, and organizations, and I have to be adaptable, flexible, understanding, appreciating other people. So, for example, today we had the problems with the technology, but one had to be patient. One had to be focused on the presentation without allowing the challenge of technology to affect the presentation. These are very important attributes and skills that consultants need to have. So, if an NGO wants to commit itself to consultancy, it has to ask itself, do I have within the organization the capacity and the capability initiative? Do I have the people with the skill sets? Not just people who are certified and qualified, but do they have the commitment, the passion? Do they have the intellectual capital, the social capital, the cultural capital, the assetability, as we say in consultancy, to do that kind of work? So you have to be very thoughtful and reflective when you're going into consultancy. But by all means, I think NGOs should look at consultancy as an alternative route to funding in terms of services and other product provision. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. The next question is how we can get in touch with international financial institutions.
A very simple question. You can get in contact with international financial institutions by looking at their website. So, for example, the United Nations has a directory of several funders. The World Bank has. Every country has a list or directory of funders, and you can use that kind of information to access funders. And once you have that information, you write to them, you send an email to them, or you write a letter of introduction to them, explaining to them what you do as an NGO, setting out very clearly your aims and objectives. What is it you're trying to accomplish? um, don't talk about you need funding. Tell them that you need support, you know. And once that happens, you meet with them, you discuss with them, because you need to know what type of funding is available. But funding is available for projects and products and services. So you have to make sure that you have the kind of services portfolio that will be amenable to funders. So I would say the first port of call is to find out what type of funders are available to meet your needs as an NGO, and then begin an introductory process. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor, for your input. Uh,
Yeah.
the next question is fee for service activities. Can you please shed more light on this?
Yes, fee for services is an area that NGOs sometimes are a bit reluctant to get involved in because it is about affordability. Now, the way in which you can introduce fee paying service is to look at the membership of your organization, excuse me, look at the people within your communities and see how what type of service they require, and then test, do an experiment, find out what type of service they would be interested in paying for, how much they would be interested in paying for. Look at the market rate. So you could start with the low end of the market rate, you can look at the median market rate or the high end, but look at where people have the potential to pay for the service and test it, you know, experiment. Your service could be providing information. You can provide a service for training and development, allow people to pay a discount rate for that. And you get sponsorship to actually help you to subsist with that. Or you can also pay for research as well. You can get people to pay for research that you're undertaking as well. So there are a variety of ways in which you can do it. But by all means, test the members that you have before you undertake such a venture or an activity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Christopher. Uh,
Yeah.
Participants, due to time limitations, we cannot cover all the questions posted here. As now we have reached the end of the webinar, I want to thank each one of you for your active participation. Please take a moment to fill out the feedback form for today's session. Your input is crucial in helping us to improve. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to contact us at support@fundsforngos.org. The feedback form will appear on your screen in a moment. Once again, thank you everyone. Thank you, Dr. Christopher. We
You're
look
most welcome.
and we look forward to seeing you in our next webinars.